January 1885. Two men shook hands on the deck of a steamship. One was a wealthy English merchant. The other was a ghost. A man with a borrowed name, a stolen title, and a mind already quietly solving the problem of how to take what wasn't his. By April, one of them would be folded into a zinc trunk in a St. Louis hotel room. And the only thing that unraveled the entire plan was a name written in ink inside a dead man's underwear. Charles Arthur Preller was 32 years old, a fabric merchant from England with inherited money, and the easy confidence that comes from never having had to fight for anything. He was broad-shouldered, generous with rounds at the bar, the kind of man who made a long ocean voyage feel shorter simply by being in the room. People remembered him without trying to. He left impressions effortlessly. The younger man was 24. He introduced himself as Dr. Walter Maxwell, the title borrowed, the name invented, the entire identity assembled with the meticulous care that only someone with nothing real to offer ever puts into a fiction. He was articulate, he was charming, and he was entirely convincing. Preller never doubted him. Not once. They became traveling companions on that transatlantic crossing. They became close, how close exactly people whispered about for decades. What really happened behind the locked door of their shared hotel room, what the nature of that bond truly was. The newspapers of 1885 danced around it in careful language, but the whispers were louder than the print. What the record does confirm is the financial reality underneath whatever else existed between them. Preller paid for things. Meals. Hotels. Incidentals. The younger man was broke. Profoundly, dangerously broke. His name wasn't Dr. Walter Maxwell. It was Hugh Mottram Brooks, and he was living a lie. The specific kind of broke that a man with a fake identity develops, the kind that can never be acknowledged, never explained, never allowed to surface because the moment it does, everything falls apart. By the time they checked into the Southern Hotel in St. Louis in April 1885, that imbalance had been running for months. It had its own gravity by then. The Southern Hotel was not the kind of place that expected things to go wrong. Gas lamps lined every corridor. The carpets were thick enough to swallow footsteps. Room 144 sat on a quiet floor, away from the street, the kind of room a man rented when he wanted privacy and could afford to pay for it. Preller checked in with the ease of someone accustomed to good hotels. Brooks checked in as Dr. Walter Maxwell and said nothing about the pharmacy visit he was already planning. Easter Sunday. The hotel bar was doing its quiet afternoon business when Brooks leaned toward the barman and asked, calmly, conversationally, as though inquiring about the weather, whether a man could escape a murder charge for $600. The barman said something non-committal. Brooks absorbed it. That same evening he walked to a pharmacy and purchased chloroform. What followed in room 144 was not a crime of passion. There was no argument that spun out of control, no sudden violence that surprised even the man committing it. What happened was the execution of a plan. Brooks had the chloroform. He had a trunk, zinc-lined, large, purchased in advance. He administered the chloroform to Preller. Charles Preller, who had probably been laughing at something not 2 hours earlier, stopped breathing. He was 32 years old. What Brooks did next tells you everything. He didn't panic. He didn't run. He undressed the body. Stripped it with a thoroughness that spoke of deliberate thought, not chaos. He folded Preller into the trunk and locked it. Then he sat down and considered misdirection. He produced a political pamphlet, something tied to Irish nationalist activity. In 1885, the word Fenian carried enormous fear in both Britain and America, conjuring bombs, conspiracies, political violence. Brooks placed it deliberately, a trail pointing investigators into the wrong labyrinth entirely. Then he took Preller's cash, settled the hotel bill at the front desk with perfect composure, and walked out into the April afternoon. He believed almost certainly that he had gotten away with it. The trunk stayed in room 144. Days passed. Then the smell started. That particular heaviness in the air near that room that no amount of ventilation reaches. When staff opened the trunk, the St. Louis Police Department was called immediately. Detectives examined the pamphlet. They noted it. An unidentified body, a political document, the misdirection was working. The body offered nothing obvious. No name, no identification. Brooks had thought of everything. Except one thing. Before leaving England, Preller had done what careful travelers did. Marked his clothes. His name written in ink, sewn into the waistband of his underwear. A small domestic habit. The kind of thing a man does once before a long voyage and forgets about completely. Brooks had undressed him, had removed every piece of clothing, had missed that one strip of fabric. When detectives found the name, the case cracked open instantly. They identified Preller, reconstructed the hotel stay, connected him to the man traveling as Dr. Walter Maxwell, established that Maxwell had checked out calmly the very day the smell began. They traced him west by rail to San Francisco. He had boarded the SS Zealandia. Destination: Auckland, New Zealand. The ship was already at sea. Here is where the story becomes something else entirely. The St. Louis police sat down and composed a telegraph message. 155 words. A physical description of Brooks. The charges. A request for arrest on arrival. That message traveled across landlines, through relay stations, under the Pacific Ocean via undersea cable, all the way to New Zealand. The bill came to $5,117. In 1885, that was the price of a house. A full year's wages for most working men. The telegraph operators in New Zealand, when they saw the charges, must have read the number twice. But it worked. The Zealandia docked in Auckland. Brooks, still Dr. Walter Maxwell, still carrying Preller's money, still walking with the composure of a man who had gotten away with something, stepped off the gangplank directly into the hands of the New Zealand police. Clean arrest. No resistance. Perhaps he was exhausted. Perhaps some deep part of him already knew. Extradition took months. International law in 1885 was still being invented in real time, and the legal machinery ground forward slowly with challenges and appeals on both sides. Meanwhile, newspapers on 2 continents covered every development. The trunk, the chloroform, the political pamphlet, the $5,000 telegram, the ship chase across the Pacific. It had everything a Victorian audience could want. When Brooks finally arrived back in St. Louis in early 1886, 2,000 people turned out to watch. 2,000. They lined the docks, pressed against barriers, climbed anything that gave them a better view. They wanted to see the man who had locked his companion in a zinc trunk and run to the other side of the world. Brooks walked through that crowd upright, controlled, not visibly diminished by any of it. That composure would define every moment of what came next. The prosecution's case was strong. The trunk, the chloroform purchase, the barman's testimony about the Easter Sunday question, the flight with Preller's money, the false identity, each piece clicked into the next. But the moment that broke the trial open, the moment that made conviction inevitable, came from a direction Brooks had never anticipated. His cell. During the months between his arrest and trial, Brooks had been held in the St. Louis jail. He had been given a cellmate. In the specific loneliness of a jail cell, far from everyone who knew him, carrying a weight he had been carrying alone for over a year, Brooks talked more than he should have. He thought he had found a sympathetic ear in the dark. Someone who understood. Someone finally worth confiding in. His cellmate was a Pinkerton detective. Not a prisoner. Not a friend. A professional planted deliberately in that cell to listen. Every word Brooks said was being memorized, recorded, prepared for testimony. Instead, he had found a trap dressed as a human being. The Pinkerton man took the stand and told the court what Brooks had told him in those quiet jail cell hours. He described the argument over money, Preller's refusal to give any, and then Brooks's own account of what happened next, how he had spoken of using chloroform, describing it to the detective as something deliberate and calculated rather than accidental. Brooks himself in that cell had framed it as intent. The jury heard it that way. It is worth noting here what the second autopsy would later confirm, and what it would complicate. The physical evidence supported chloroform as the cause of death. Whether a second substance had been used first, as Brooks apparently told the detective, the medical examiners could not establish with certainty from the body alone. The autopsy record pointed to chloroform. What Brooks claimed in that cell may have been confession, or it may have been a man in darkness making himself sound more deliberate than he was. Either way, the jury heard the words he had chosen to say, and those words destroyed him. Brooks took the stand himself. He wept. He told the court it was a medical procedure gone wrong, that he had been acting as a physician, that he had administered chloroform for a legitimate surgical purpose, that Preller's death was a tragedy, not a crime. He had panicked afterward. The trunk, the flight, the false name. All of it was the desperate act of a frightened man covering an accident, not a murderer covering a crime. He delivered this with real tears. with visible grief, with the full force of the most convincing performance of his life. Then the second autopsy report was read into evidence. The findings were thorough. They were methodical. And they were completely incompatible with the story of a routine medical procedure. The physical condition of the body, the manner of incapacitation, the absence of any preparation consistent with legitimate surgery. The medical record dismantled his testimony point by point, with the cold patience of science applied to a lie. The jury listened to Brooks weep. Then they listened to the examiner speak. They knew which one to believe. June 4, 1886. First-degree murder. Brooks appealed. His lawyers raised procedural challenges. The British government made diplomatic inquiries. There was something uncomfortable, from London's perspective, about one of its subjects headed for execution in Missouri. 2 years of legal argument followed. Every avenue closed. August 10, 1888. Hugh Mottram Brooks was hanged. He had spent those final years giving interviews, writing letters, maintaining to the very end the composed presentation of a wrongly convicted man. Whether the fiction had by then become indistinguishable from his own memory of events, whether he had told the story so many times he believed it, nobody can say. He took whatever the truth was with him. Newspapers called him the Little Chloroformer. The nickname had that slightly jaunty quality of Victorian crime journalism, reduce the man to his method, make him almost quaint, give readers something repeatable. It stuck. It still appears in historical references today. The Southern Hotel is gone now. The block where room 144 stood is occupied by something built later, indifferent to what came before. The zinc trunk that once held a man was displayed for decades in the St. Louis Police Department, something to show visitors, a relic of the chase that had cost them the price of a house. At some point they stopped showing it. Nobody recorded when or where it went after that. The ship that carried Brooks toward what he thought was freedom made other voyages after that one, carrying other passengers with other secrets, none of them as costly. And somewhere in Bellefontaine Cemetery in St. Louis, Charles Preller lies buried beneath a stone that bears his name, returned to him eventually, by the local English merchants who remembered him and the family who finally came. It was there in the fabric all along, waiting to be found.